Well, we finally reached the 550th prediction for the contest of 1 Kings chapter 18, in which Elijah is pitted against 550 prophets, actually against 450 prophets of Baal who showed up and contested, against 400 prophets of Asherah who never showed up and didn't contest, and in the literal account there were 100 prophets of Jehovah who were hidden in a cave by 50s but would have actually probably shown up at the contest, but the account doesn't say whether they did or they didn't. However, in the greater meaning, these 100 prophets are hidden in a Laodicean cave within the watchtower, and they are competing with this church because they stole our baptism in order to play power games and compete with us. What I'm saying is that the maximum number of predictions I can make are 551, because Elijah himself was a prophet of Jehovah who was at the contest. This is the 550th. It's the 551st if you include a sub-prediction we did, which we published. So there's a pretty good chance that this is the last prediction I'll make, and if not, I can only really make one more. But the incredible thing about this prediction is that it's for Heshvan 21, 2016, which is the 11th Second New Covenant Pentecost of the contest. And 550 prophets is 11 Pentecosts. A Pentecost is a 50 count. 11 50 counts is a 550 count. So not only is this the 550th prediction attempt I've made at when these fire signs of 1 Kings 18 will occur, it is made for, and the prediction date is the 550th Second New Covenant Pentecostal day of the contest. If you only count days in the contest, which began 2006, Sivan 11 or 12, which was the first prediction, if you only count days which are in fact days counted towards the 2NC Pentecost, the 50 days from Tishri 2 to Heshvan 21, if you only count those days, then Heshvan 21, which is our new prediction, it's Heshvan 21 plus or minus 1 day, because you never know with inclusive and exclusive counts and with time zones and with all other possibilities, like for example you get a fire sign on one day in one time zone but it continues throughout the next day and the next day. I mean, the first fire sign in Israel ran from 2010 Chislev 20, it was the biggest fire in modern Israel's history, upon Mount Carmel, where this 1 Kings 18 was set, and the contest occurred in the days of Elijah and Ahab and Jezebel. That lasted from Chislev 20 to Chislev 23, which is, 4 days. The incredible thing is that it's the 550th, we are predicting the 550th Second New Covenant Pentecostal day for a contest between Elijah and 550 prophets of Baal, and this is our 550th prediction, and Elijah is not only the fourth Elijah, which means he's the mediator of the fourth Elijah covenant, which is the water baptism for the fourth true Christian church. He's also the second new covenant mediator, hence the 2NC Pentecost. And that covenant has been hidden from mankind, because in Jeremiah 31:31 it says, "Here I am making a new covenant," not the new covenant, a. There's a Hebrew word for the, it's not used. Jesus said he was the Alpha and the Omega. And it does mean the first and the last, but there are 24 letters in the Greek alphabet, and there are 24 salvation covenants made between man and God, by which we are saved. Not one, not two, 24. And that's how negligent the churches have been. Because Jacob didn't have one wife, he had 2 wives and 2 concubines. He had children by 4 wives. And those children, the 12 tribes of Israel, prefigure the 12 apostolic tribes by water baptism. A wife is a covenant according to Paul in Galatians 4. So you've got 4 covenants right there. But of course he wasn't the only patriarch to have more than one wife. And so it goes on. And if you do the work, you find there are 24 salvation covenants. The messenger of the covenant is often the mediator. And I am the messenger of the second new covenant. Because the first new covenant is for people to sit on thrones and judge the 12 tribes of Israel. So they're kings, and they judge the 12 tribes of Israel. We can't all be in that covenant, because there'll be nobody to judge. We'll all be sitting on thrones with no one to be judged. So there needs to be another covenant to save people who aren't kings in that sense. And we also know that the first new covenant saints become angels in heaven. But that's fine, but you can't be a king over humans on earth if you're an angel in heaven. But you can't be both a king and a priest of the same people. And Jesus is the high priest. You've got kings in heaven, you need kings on earth. So look, I better not go into too much detail about the second new covenant, save to say there's a lot more to God's salvation plan than the first new covenant. There's lots of new covenants, and of course we have Christianized all of the festivals under law, and at each festival you drink a different salvation cup of one of these salvation covenants. So at the Passover you drink actually 4 salvation cups if you know what you're doing, because the Jews drink 4 cups, and they don't know why they do it, but they are God's prophets even today. And the 4 cups you should drink are the angelic ransom covenant, the Alpha covenant, the first covenant Michael made with God to ransom Adam angelically, and then the faith ransom covenant, which was made by Melchizedek and God, and then the first Abrahamic covenant, by which everybody is saved into the kingdom in the Abrahamic system, and the first new covenant. And then at the 2NC Pentecost you actually drink the cup of the 4th Elijah covenant, which is the covenant, the water baptism covenant of this church. At the Pentecost, the 1NC Pentecost on Sivan 5 to Sivan 11, depending on when the Sabbath falls, you drink the cup of the 1NC church, which in the first presence was the first Elijah covenant, John the Baptist's water baptism covenant, and in the second presence was the Watchtower's covenant of Charles Russell. That's the cup that should have been drunk but wasn't at the Watchtower Pentecost, that they didn't even celebrate. Such was their negligence and blindness. Then at the Zoa Pentecost you drink the cup of the church ransom covenant made with Methuselah and God. At the Zoa 2NC Pentecost you drink the upgraded non-Adamic version of the 4th Elijah covenant, which is the same thing you drink at the 2NC Pentecost, but it's Zoarized or non-Adamified, non-Adamicalized, or whatever you call it. On Tishri 1, Rosh Hashanah, you actually drink, well, we don't drink it, but it is the festival that celebrates the very first salvation covenant made by Jehovah himself to save the angels from first death, because somebody had to pull them out of first death, and God doesn't ask his son to make a sacrifice that he himself hasn't made. He is not a hypocrite, and Jesus said, everything I do I've seen my Father doing before. And so God A got married, and B gave his life for his people. Tishri 5 is the Zoa 2NC. Booths is when we drink the 2NC covenant cup. Actually we drink it at the solemn assembly, because booths is a period of disassembly, so you can't drink a cup during booths itself, but there's a reassembly at the end of it, the solemn assembly, which is actually when you drink the second new covenant. And I think that covers most of them. A salvation covenant for a festival I am giving you, but 4 in the case of the Passover, or the Lord's evening meal, which Jesus Christianized into the Lord's evening meal. So, back to the 2NC, that was a good detour. It's the 11th Pentecost, the 11th 2NC Pentecost of the contest, which began 2006 Sivan 11 or 12, so those Pentecosts are 2006 Heshvan 21 to 2016 Heshvan 21, when we now expect the second and third fire signs. The first fire sign was on 2010 Chislev 21, essentially. It was between 20 and 23, but it covered 21, which is the late 2NC Pentecost. Now it says in 2 Kings 1, as regards the chief of the first 50, that Elijah spoke to him, whereas as regards the chief of the second 50, which is the second fire sign of 2 Kings 1, which is the second and third fire signs of 1 Kings 18, he spoke to them, and Elijah spoke to them by speaking to the chief. So in other words, the chief was a part of the 50. or he couldn't have spoken to them, i.e. the 50, at the same, but by merely speaking to the chief. By speaking to the chief, he's speaking to the chief and the 50 because the chief was a part of the 50. What that means is, translating it, the chief of the first 50 was a late Pentecost, which was a Pentecostal day but not the 50 itself, whereas the chief of the second 50 is actually the Pentecost, which is an inclusive chief, because the head of a family is part of a family. Centurion in the army is chief of 100 people, but is he one of the 100 or is he the 101st? That's the ambiguity. And that ambiguity is the word play in 2 Kings 1, and that is why the first fire sign of 2 Kings 1, which was the first fire sign of 1 Kings 18, the chief happens to the exclusive chief of the 2NC Pentecost in 2010, which was not the Pentecost on Heshvan 21, but the late Pentecost on Chislev 21, whereas in 2016, the following Pentecost, the second 50 is said to be a following 50, and it follows because it takes exactly the same Pentecostal pattern, but just in a different year. It took us a while to see that. That occurs not at the exclusive chief of Chislev 21, but the inclusive chief, the Pentecost itself, Heshvan 21. So that's 2 Kings 1. Haggai 2, yes. Paraphrasing it, it says on the 7th, on the 21st of the month, remember what we agreed when I brought you out of Egypt. And then it says, repeat one small she, and I'm rocking the heavens, the earth, the sea and the dry. And what that means is, bear in mind the Passover and the Pentecost, which were agreed when they left Egypt. The Passover, which resulted in them leaving, the Passover execution, sorry, that was the trigger for them to leave. Cakes was when they left, and then they did the Pentecost at Mount Sinai after they left. But all three arguably were in the bringing forth out of Egypt. So it's Passover, cakes, or Pentecost actually. The 7th, the 21st of the month could be the last day of cakes, 7th day of cakes. It could be Tishri 21, the last day of booths, which is in the 7th month. Or it could indeed be Heshvan 21, because that is the 21st of the month, and it's in the 7th year in 2016 of Jesus' reign. And in fact, we take it to be the latter. And the word occurs in the hand of Haggai from that time forward, and the hand means 5 months, and I get to run Zoa for 5 months until the third Holy Spirit takes over on Nisan 18, 2017, for 10 cities, 10 minors, until the end of Zoa on Shabbat 14, 2017, which is then followed by the Omega Kingdom for 2 months, till 2018, Nisan 14, which is the physical end of the physical world, when everybody who's not going to be a kingdom citizen falls asleep in death and then goes to Gehenna or gets resurrected. We bear in mind a Passover or a Pentecost. Well, since this is happening on Heshvan 21, and we're taking that to be the fulfillment of Haggai 2:1, the 7th, the 21st of the month in the 7th regnal year of the Christ. It's a Pentecost. And it says, repeat one, bearing in mind a Passover and a Pentecost, and I am rocking the heavens and the earth, the sea and the dry. The point being that on Heshvan 21, Satan rocks them with his terrorist fire signs, not God. God doesn't do terrorist fire signs. He gives Elijah the answer as to when these terrorist fire signs occur, but actually Baal, in the greater meaning, performs the fire signs, in the greater meaning of 1 Kings 18. So God says, in a little while I will be rocking. And repeat one, small she actually, is the correct interpretation. So you repeat a festival, and the next festival after Heshvan 21 is in fact the first Watchtower Passover, which is Chislev 14, at which festival God rocks the heavens of the Watchtower by the Passover execution. I mean, these are real Passovers. I mean, the way the Jews came out of Egypt is a type, it's an archetype for how God's people at the end, the spiritual Jews, will come out of the Egypt of the world. And it will be by a Passover, by a real Passover, where firstborns who come into the Passover house do not die, but firstborns who omit to come into the Passover house drop dead. and likewise the domestic animals of those, which has various different greater meanings. You bump up men to be angels and animals to be men. It's sort of one extra step in the evolutionary chain, if you want to use that word. Shall we say in the complexity chain, or the upgrade chain would be better. So the firstborn of the saints in the Watchtower Bethels, if they don't come to the Passover, they'll die, on Chislev 14, and also the firstborn of the water-baptized non-saints, who are the greater domestic animals. They die if they don't join the Passover house too. So there's a real Passover coming, and that's when God does his execution. The difference really, the stark contrast between these two, is that Satan executes unrighteously in order to induce fear and terror in order to get a power grab, whereas God executes righteously, giving people a chance. If you claim to be a saint or are a saint and won't turn up at the Passover, you haven't got the faith you should have, and you have failed. You cannot be a saint, and so you get killed. But it's not the end of you, because God's mercy and love always triumphs over his righteousness and judgment, and you will get another chance. So that's Haggai 2. Small, because the first Watchtower Passover will be a very small affair. Not many people will turn up. The last one, the third one, will be huge. Only the early responders will be at the first one. And so God is saying, okay, Satan's rocked you, now be strong on Heshvan 21, because in a little while, or at a small festival, at the next festival, I will rock. So that's Haggai 2. So now that we've got this fire sign on Heshvan 21, what it means, the other thing is, being a Pentecost, is when the descended 1NC princes come out of the ark. They're already out of the ark, but they come to see us, they come into the church. The Pentecost is when the Holy Spirit is poured out. So we hope to see the Holy Spirit, which is the third Holy Spirit of the kingdom of Jesus, his wife, the 1NC saints, the apostles. We hope to see them next week on Heshvan 21. What that means is that the third presence will begin then. And what that means is that the second presence began 120 years being the length of the presence, plus 2 gaps of 4.5 and 5.5 years earlier, which is 1886 Heshvan 21. And what that means is that Russell was sanctified, Charles Russell, the president of the Watchtower, the first one, was sanctified on Heshvan 21, which is the day that Jesus was born. I mean, Heshvan 21 is first ripe fruits, compared with Tishri 2, which is the day Adam was born, which is first fruits. And so the second presence began on the same day that Jesus was born, which makes sense, because Jesus actually made the first presence. So that's a cute understanding. Now things get a bit technical here. Our present understanding of the 2 answers of 1 Kings 18 is that the first answer was our 548th prediction, which was incorrect, and the second answer is the 550th, which we believe is correct. And you might say, well, why on earth should an incorrect prediction be an answer? And my answer is this. We've been considering about 70 scriptures and trying to put the jigsaw together of those to get the date, and we're probably not considering enough. I tend to want a good understanding of a few things rather than a cursory understanding of many things. So I've gone to really try and understand just a few accounts. And it may be that because we haven't put enough pieces together in the jigsaw, there are in fact 2 answers to the equations we've been considering. And because the answer on the 548th was really cute, it was the Zoa 2NC Pentecost, late version of it, rather than the 550th, which is just the regular 2NC Pentecost. And it may be that both answers were correct in the sense that they fulfilled the scriptures I was considering. It may not be that. But there's certainly 2 answers. I don't want to throw away the beautiful understanding that on Tishri the 7th, 2016, we got an answer from God, an acceptance from God, just as Solomon got it on 1026 Tishri 7. And there's other reasons to believe that the 548th was an answer from God. I mean, you can also argue it that, well, there's plenty of stuff in the 548th, including the Omega Kingdom and new understandings in that, which constitute part of the answer of the 550th, whereas the 549th didn't go for a 2NC Pentecost, it went for the 75th Pentecost of the contest, just counting the number of days in the contest. So that was further off. So either we say that I'm not considering enough scriptures and therefore there were two answers which may not be correct, or we say, which probably is correct, that the 548th had a lot of the elements in it of the 550th, and part of the answer we got at the 548th, but we finished it off and got the correct date, which was the second part of the answer on the 550th. So we've got these two answers, both 2NC Pentecostal answers, to what is a very Pentecostal contest. It gets technical because you see in Exodus 12 what it says is this month, which relates to when they changed the calendar to Nisan. The sacred calendar always was Nisan, but the sacred calendar became dominant over the secular calendar in 1513 when the Jews left Egypt. And there's a greater meaning to that. And it says this month will be the first of the months for you. This month will be the first of the months of the year for you. One is tempted to say, well, since the Passover's in Chislev, and since we go into the Ark in Chislev, which is when the secular rulership changes from satanic to Jesus, because Satan has no power in the Ark, your secular Caesar in the Ark, your secular ruler, your king, your secular king in the Ark, who actually sets administrative secular rules, will be Jesus Christ. It won't be Satan. And that requires a calendar change to a new secular year. And the obvious thing to do will be to say, well, it's Chislev. But there's a massive problem with that, which is that we progress to divinity through 7 secular years, starting with the Tishri year, which we've had in the past, and now we believe we've gone to the Heshvan year, and you can't just jump 2 months. You've got to go one step at a time, because there are 7 steps, and the Sabbath is the sacred year, which is Nisan, and that's a pattern that's too beautiful to throw away. But the wording is there to keep it, because it actually says, referring to those in Egypt, which is the watchtower, this month will be the first of the months of the year for you. It doesn't say it'll be the first of the months of the new secular year, or even the first of the months of the year. And we don't allow the watchtower people into the church until their wilderness penalty is ended on Heshvan 30. So the first month they can come in to Zoar is Chislev, whereas others can come in Heshvan. So the year of escape, which is the first new secular year of the kingdom, which is the acceptable year of Isaiah 61, and the calendar change year, for everybody else it's Heshvan, but for the watchtower it's Chislev. And Exodus 12 refers to watchtower escape and salvation. Hence it's 1 month out. And that was pretty confusing and difficult to deal with, but I think we're there now. But one thing that was easier to deal with a new date, well, there's 2 beautiful things about it. One is that the 300 denarii of the 1NC reserve anointing for their burial runs from the first watchtower Passover, Chislev 14, and ends on Tishri 14, when Satan and the demons go to hell, the unrepentant demons, at the dragon's Passover. And it's perfect that Jesus' 1NC reserves continue until they see off the dragon, especially as they may be the only people with authority to evict demons. We might get it, we might not, but someone will certainly get it, and they will get it. That makes a lot more sense, and that is resulted from bumping the Passovers 1 month forward. But the other cute thing is Daniel 10, which fits much better, because Daniel would start mourning on Chislev 1 when they start losing their congregation to Zoar, not knowing, thinking that's a terrible thing. And Chislev 1's first day of the week, and there are 3 solar weeks of mourning. So that would take it to Chislev 21, and then he gets the vision on 24, Chislev 24. And Daniel is the first new covenant reserves in the watchtower who are going to turn up at the second watchtower Passover. So they need the vision to make sure that they come along, the ones who God has chosen, who Jesus has chosen actually to be his wife. And in the account it says, well, Daniel, you're a very desirable man, and what is meant is, I want to marry you. And this is not a homosexual marriage, it is a administrative marriage, it's a metaphorical marriage, just as the chairman of IBM is or the chief executive is the sort of, actually the chairman is the husband and the chief executive is the head of the wife and the board of directors is the wife, basically, in God's symbolism here. The cute wording in Daniel 10 is that Daniel doesn't anoint himself for the 3 weeks of the mourning, whereas of course everybody else in the watchtower, who isn't Daniel, has anointed themselves and declared themselves to be 1NC reserves in circumstances where they're not. In fact, nobody who's ever partaken after 2002 or from 2002 at a Passover in the watchtower, all of them are fake 1NCs. There's not one real 1NC other than the ones who partook, I think, on ER 14 in Laodicea. So I think that means anyone who's ever partaken Nisan 14 actually, since 2002 onwards, is a fake 1NC. And what they've done is they've anointed themselves. But what Daniel does is he's not prepared to accept he's anointed by anointing himself until he's told he is by the angel who turns up on the 24th. And then, once he's become a 1NC, then it makes sense to count the 3 weeks of him not partaking, because before it's known whether he's a 1NC or not. Because there's in Daniel 10 there's 3 weeks of not partaking, not eating dainty bread, 3 weeks of not anointing himself, and 3 weeks of mourning. And they're not all the same 3 weeks in the greater meaning, of course. The mourning and the not anointing are coincident, but that once he's anointed, then you can run the 3 weeks of not partaking, because before he's anointed, who cares whether he partakes or not? So that would run the 3 weeks of not partaking from Chislev 24 to Tebeth 14 inclusively when he partakes. So that's Daniel 10. I'm pleased to have got to the 550th. It means I've only got to do one more of these at the most, and I probably don't have to do that either because the sub prediction would count as a prediction, or because Elijah was competing against 550 prophets. And basically it's a Pentecostal contest, and so I should do 550 predictions, and it should finish on the Pentecost. And the other thing is the Jericho account going round for 7 years, the first 7 years of Jesus' reign, and 7 months in the 7th year. That takes you to Tishri 30. And that means that this thing has to stop in Heshvan. You can't get to Heshvan 30, and we haven't got any more Pentecosts after Heshvan 21. So from that reason it has to be Heshvan 21 from Jericho. I don't think we can push it any further, and I think it should end at the 11th Pentecost of the contest, because 11 Pentecosts of prophets were there at the contest. I mean, we can deduce that the 100 prophets of Jehovah were there, because what on earth were they doing if they didn't turn up at such a contest? They weren't really prophets of Jehovah. They're not going to watch Elijah versus the prophets of Baal. We know from the sentence counts that they had to be there, because otherwise this thing would have happened already hundreds of days ago. So we are predicting the 2 terrorist attacks, nuclear terrorist attacks, that produce a rising cloud like a man's palm, man-made, from the sea, so emanating in some way from the sea. And a man's palm is palm, not hand. Palm is concave or convex, however you look at it, like a mushroom cloud. And Elijah bent down in the shape of a mushroom, putting his head between his knees, and said, "Look, go and look at the sea for a rising cloud." In other words, he did a mushroom and said, "Look for a mushroom cloud rising from the sea." And we also have been chasing this cloud around the wilderness, a pillar of fire and cloud, for over 40 months. This is nuclear terrorism. It's also the stumbling block of mankind, of Daniel 2, which we stumble on, because really we've reached the point with our technology where a war has become like that Star Trek episode where 2 computers fought each other. American 35 is mainly software. The Navy missile systems are software. Missile systems are basically software. And you end up with the war having nothing to do with how strongly you feel something, or what your passion is, or what injustice you feel you've suffered. It's just how good is your software writer. And that has absolutely nothing to do with how war started. And once you get to the point where war is just one computer against another computer, that's the end of war. And that's where we've pretty much got to. So apart from it being totally futile and very, very offensive and not much defence, it's also become an absurd battle between software routines, which has nothing to do with with the courage and passion and sense of justice and righting wrongs that war might originally have been about, although normally it's about power, greed and ambition, isn't it, and selfishness and intolerance. But we're reaching the end of that, and God's going to teach us that by permitting us, or permitting Satan actually, to let off some nuclear bombs. And it won't be long before we realise we've got to scrap them all. It would have been wiser to have scrapped them before we reached that point, because they are a totally unrighteous and disproportionate response to any form of military attack. Even if you're attacked with a nuclear bomb that kills millions of your citizens, you don't respond by killing millions of their citizens because they didn't send the bomb. You kill the guy who sent the bomb, which is the military. So there's all sorts of lessons to be learned, and we need them physically, or we'll never learn them, tragically. And hence this is gonna kick off. And if our timing's right, it'll be next week it kicks off. So we're expecting the first, well, we don't know which is the first and which is the second, but they're both happening between October the 25th sunset and October 28th sunset, which is Heshvan 20 BLC sunset to Heshvan 22 BLC sunset. This is not the modern Israeli calendar, it is the ancient biblical lunar calendar of all mankind, 360 days, 12 months, 30 days to the month. So that's when we expect them, and we expect one from the Hudson to hit Manhattan and the other from the Thames to hit east of London, somewhere around Dartford, near the Dartford Bridge. We deduce that from 1 Kings 18 and all the other scriptures we've looked at. So that's what our 5/50th prediction is for. So we do advise anybody in Dartford or near it, or in New York, to stay out of those two areas. I know we've been wrong 550 times before, actually 549 times before. But I mean, I wouldn't go to Dartford or to New York between the 25th and the 28th. And the most dangerous day is Heshvan 21, which would be the 26th, sunset on the 26th to sunset on the 27th of October. But anyway, may God look after you whatever happens. Thank you.